Good evening, dear brothers and sisters. Have you ever in your life felt like you were trapped between a rock and a hard place? When behind you lies a sinful past, an enemy in relentless pursuit, and before you an ocean of problems, a murky future with no way out. You stand there between the enemy and the sea, and it seems as though there isn't a single ray of hope left. If you have ever felt that way, then tonight's story is for you. Together, we will journey back to a dark night in history, following the footsteps of millions of newly freed slaves, to witness one of the greatest and most dramatic miracles in the Bible. It is the story of Moses and the nation of Israel, cornered at the shore of the Red Sea. A story of panic, of grumbling, of a desperate prayer, and of a night when the very laws of nature had to bow to the will of the Creator. The story of Moses and the Red Sea. The miracle that rescued Israel is not just a heroic epic. It is a living declaration that even when we see no way forward, God can still make a way for us. I invite you to prepare your hearts to witness His rescuing power. Part 1. The Cry in the Passover Light. Night fell on Egypt, but this was no ordinary night. The air was thick with a sense of dread. Inside the homes of the Israelites, families huddled together. They ate in haste, with their cloaks tucked into their belts, their sandals on their feet, and their staffs in their hands. It was the meal of travelers, the meal of deliverance, the very first Passover meal. Outside, on the doorframes of each of their homes, there was a sign, the blood of a lamb, a sign of faith, of obedience. But in the homes of the Egyptians, there was no such sign. And when midnight came, a terrifying cry of anguish rose up throughout the land. From the palace of Pharaoh to the humblest shacks, there was not a house where someone was not dead. The firstborn son, the hope of every family, had been taken by the angel of death. An entire mighty empire was brought to its knees by an unbearable grief. That night, Pharaoh himself, whose heart had been hardened through 10 plagues, finally surrendered. He summoned Moses and Aaron in the darkness and said, "Up! Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go!" The words the people of Israel had awaited for 430 years of slavery had finally been spoken. Freedom. Part 2. The Great Exodus. And so they left. A great exodus, the likes of which history had never seen. Not just a few thousand people. The Bible says there were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. An estimated 2 million people, along with vast herds of livestock and the wealth the Egyptians had given them, poured out of Egypt. Imagine the magnificent scene. A massive stream of people stretching for miles, moving slowly but with great determination. There were the laughs of children breathing the air of freedom for the first time. The songs of women, hymns of thanksgiving. The hopeful eyes of the men, looking toward a promised land they had only heard of in stories. Among that crowd, perhaps there was a small family. A young woman named Eliana, holding her little boy's hand, her eyes fixed on her husband's back. For the first time in her life, her son would grow up not as a slave. That hope was so warm, so sweet. Part 3. The Pillar of Cloud and the Pillar of Fire. But how do you lead such a massive crowd through a desolate wilderness, with no map, no compass? God did not abandon them. He gave them a visible guide, an undeniable sign of his presence. The Bible says, "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light." Imagine the awe and comfort of the people. By day, when the desert sun was scorching hot, a giant pillar of cloud stood in the sky, giving them shade and showing them the way to go. By night, when the desert was cold and dark, that same pillar became a brilliant pillar of fire, warming and illuminating them, chasing away the darkness and the wild beasts. God was not a distant deity. He was a guide, a protector, walking with his people every step of the way. The pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire were a declaration. I am here. Do not be afraid. Part 4. Pharaoh's hardened heart. But back in Egypt, the grief of loss quickly turned into anger and regret. Pharaoh sat in his desolate palace. The body of his firstborn son had been carried away. But now, as the initial pain subsided, other thoughts arose. The thoughts of a king, an economist. What have we done? His officials whispered. Why have we let the Israelites go and have lost their services? Millions of slaves. An endless source of labor for their great monuments. For the economy of Egypt, gone in a single night. Pharaoh's pride surged again. He could not accept this defeat. He could not let the God of slaves win. The Bible says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That hardness was the result of the 10 times Pharaoh had hardened his own heart against God's miracles. Now he had crossed a line. "Make my chariot ready." Pharaoh roared. He mobilized his entire army, including 600 of his best chariots, and personally led the pursuit. The thunder of wheels and the neighing of horses echoed across the land. The wrath of Egypt was thundering at the heels of the Israelites. Part 5. Trapped. Following the guidance of the pillar of cloud, the Israelites had come to what seemed like a dead end. They camped at Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-Zephon. Before them was the Red Sea, a vast, impassable body of water. On either side were treacherous mountains and desert. They had walked into a natural trap, and then they heard it. At first, just a faint rumble in the distance. Then it grew louder, a thundering roar. The ground began to tremble. A massive cloud of dust rose on the horizon. It was the Egyptian army. Imagine the absolute terror of the people. They could see the glint of sunlight off the bronze chariots. They could hear the bloodthirsty cries of the soldiers. The enemy they had just escaped was now bearing down on them for the kill. The sweet hope of freedom instantly turned into the bitter taste of despair. They were trapped. Behind them, Pharaoh. Before them, the sea. There was no escape. Part 6. Grumbling in the desert. And in that moment of desperation, their fledgling faith collapsed. They forgot the 10 plagues in Egypt. They forgot the pillar of cloud and fire that was right there above their heads. All they could see was the enemy and the sea. And they turned on Moses, not to ask for guidance, but to blame him. Listen to their cry, recorded in the Bible. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Their words were so bitter. Just a few days earlier, they were singing songs of freedom. Now, they longed to return to slavery. Fear had twisted their perception, making them prefer the familiar safety of misery over the uncertain freedom of a trial. Moses stood there, caught between the anger of his people and the threat of the enemy. The burden of a leader had never been so heavy. Part 7. Moses' Cry. In that moment, what did Moses do? He didn't argue with the people. He didn't try to find a military solution. He did the only thing a true leader of God could do. He cried out to the Lord. The Bible doesn't record the details of his prayer, but we can imagine it. It was not a calm prayer. It must have been a cry from the depths of his soul, a cry of helplessness, of burden, of a man standing between the life and death of an entire nation. "Lord, you brought us here. What do we do now?" And God answered, an answer that was powerful and somewhat surprising. "Why are you crying out to me?" The Lord said, a question that seemed to remind Moses that this was no longer a time for prayer. This was a time for action and trust. Tell the Israelites to move on. Move on? Move where? Straight into the sea? The Lord's command seemed absurd. "As for you," God continued, "raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." An unbelievable command. A solution beyond all human imagination. Part 8. Stand firm and see. Even before receiving that specific command, Moses, with extraordinary faith, turned and spoke these immortal words to the people. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Be still. In the midst of panic, that is the hardest thing to do. But it is the prerequisite for seeing the power of God. And then the first miracle occurred. The pillar of cloud, which had been leading the Israelites, moved to the rear. It stood between the camp of Israel and the camp of Egypt. To the Egyptians, it became a cloud of darkness, so they could not advance. But to the Israelites, it gave light by night. God had created a barrier. He had bought his people. Part 9. A path in the heart of the sea. And then Moses did as the Lord commanded. He walked to the shore. Before millions of astonished eyes, he raised his staff and stretched his hand out over the sea. Immediately, the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind that blew all night long. Imagine the sound of that wind. Not an ordinary wind, but a wind of power, the very breath of the Creator. The wind shrieked, whipping the sea, and the sea parted. The water didn't just recede. The Bible describes an extraordinary scene. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Not a muddy path, but dry ground. Not the water pulling back, but the water standing up like two walls. Two giant walls of water, in which fish could be seen swimming, glistening in the light of the pillar of fire. A sight both terrifying and majestic beyond all description. The miracle had happened. The impossible path had been opened. Part 10. The dry ground. Moses was the first to step down. Then Aaron, and then the entire nation of Israel, one by one, began their greatest journey. Imagine being Eliana, the young mother. She held her little boy's hand tightly. On one side, a towering wall of water. On the other, a towering wall of water. Above, the night sky illuminated by the pillar of fire. Beneath her feet, dry ground, where the seabed should have been. Was she afraid? Of course. But that fear was enveloped in an overwhelming sense of awe and gratitude. Every step was an affirmation. Our God is real. He is fighting for us. Millions of people passed through. A parade of faith, walking between two walls of death on a path of life. They were walking from the darkness of slavery through the heart of the sea toward the light of freedom. Part 11. The Hand of the Lord. Just as dawn was breaking, the Egyptians, after a night of being held back by the cloud, finally saw what was happening. They saw the Israelites were nearly on the other side. In a rage, Pharaoh gave a foolish command. Forward! After them into the heart of the sea. The entire army, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen, charged down the dry path into the sea. They were so arrogant, they thought the path God had opened for his people was also for them. But when they were in the middle of the sea, the Lord took action. He jammed the wheels of their chariots, making them difficult to drive. The Egyptians began to panic. Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. But it was too late. When the last Israelite was safely on the other side, the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place, powerful and violent. The two walls of water collapsed, engulfing Pharaoh's entire army. The chariots, the horses, and the mightiest warriors of the Egyptian empire were buried beneath the waves. That morning, the people of Israel stood on the shore and saw the bodies of their former oppressors washed up on the beach. The powerful hand of the Lord had delivered them completely. The enemy was destroyed. They were truly free. Part 12. A Song of Freedom and Bitter Water. On the shores of the Red Sea that day, a song was raised. Moses and all the Israelites sang a song to the Lord, a song of praise, a love song of freedom. Then Miriam, Moses' sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her, with tambourines and dancing, singing, Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. It was a moment of pure joy, an explosion of worship from rescued hearts. Their faith was at its peak. But the story doesn't stop there. The Bible says that after this great victory, they traveled for 3 days in the desert without finding water. When they came to a place called Marah, they found water, but they could not drink it because it was bitter. And what did the people do? They forgot the miracle of the Red Sea. They forgot their song of victory. They grumbled against Moses again. What are we to drink? Just 3 days. Only 3 days after witnessing one of the greatest miracles of all time, their faith wavered at the first new test. The great miracle at the Red Sea had rescued their bodies from the slavery of Egypt. But it seemed it had not yet rescued their souls from a slave mentality. Fear, grumbling, and unbelief. The journey in the desert, the journey of heart transformation, had only just begun. And our story stops there, at the bitter waters of Marah. An ending that seems like a letdown after such a glorious victory. But it is right here that the greatest question arises, a theme for us to ponder and discuss together. The miracle at the Red Sea was a physical deliverance, an external intervention. But why couldn't such a great miracle change the hearts of the Israelites? Why did they so quickly return to grumbling and unbelief? What is the warning here? Perhaps the warning is this: the greatest deliverance is not being saved from difficult circumstances on the outside, but being saved from the Egypt, the slave mentality, the fear, the unbelief that still resides deep within our own hearts. God could part the Red Sea in a single night. But to transform the hearts of a people from slaves into free children of God, that required a 40-year journey in the wilderness, with countless tests and lessons. So, which miracle is greater? Parting the Red Sea or changing a hardened heart? The story of the Red Sea is a reminder for each of us. When God performs a Red Sea miracle in your life, delivering you from some great problem, what will you do when you face the bitter waters of the next trial? Will you raise a song of faith, or will you utter a grumble of unbelief? The path of faith is not just a single event of rescue, but a whole process of transformation. That is the question the Bible always puts before each of us. God bless you.